Hey guys, Max Voltage here. Um, this video has been a long time coming, been working at it for a while, but finally going to be giving you um, my solar panel array 1 year review and also what to consider if you're thinking about getting solar for your own home. So let's get into it. So we'll go over the system design, what the results were, both how much power was produced as well as the cost savings that I have seen. And then basically, what are the things that you need to consider if you are thinking about doing solar, as well as some things to look out for. Basically, some lessons learned on my part and some things I'm having to lived through a year and a half after I had to put on my house. So, all right, let's get started. And there's a picture of my my solar array on the house. Let's get started. So basically, what's in the system? So obviously, there are the solar panels. That's obvious. We have 19 of them arranged in a particular fashion to maximize the roof space so that I was able to go from a standard system design, which would have been about 5 kilowatts, to a 6 kilowatt or almost 6 kilowatt. If you take the 315 watt panels times 19, it's just short of 6 kilowatts. Each of those panels have power optimizers. So in a typical home system, you're either going to have power optimizers or micro inverters. So power optimizers are used in just a single inverter system, and they allow each of the panels to operate at a different power level. So if they have different different ultraviolet rays hitting them, basically a cloud comes over and the cloud may be covering only a portion of the panels, the power optimizers allow them to each panel to operate independently. If you had string inverters, they would all be at a single wattage. They have to all be at the same with the way that they're used. Anyway, like I said, typical home is going to have power optimizers if it's a single inverter system, or micro inverters will actually invert the from DC to AC at the panel instead of doing it at a single inverter. So on my particular system, we used a 5 kilowatt inverter. And the reason why we used the inverter at the time, again, this was in 2019, was that in colder temperatures, power optimizers were more reliable. So micro inverters at the time were not quite as reliable. And being that microinverters are on the roof, you want everything on the roof to be as reliable as possible because that's the stuff that's going to be hard to replace. So we went with the inverter system. And then there's also an emergency kill switch that goes in. So if you look at the top right, the white box on the far right, that's the inverter. The antenna actually communicates to a central point all of the information, including how much power is being produced and when. Um, so you have a nice graph, and it basically communicates to either a website or an actual app that you can look at. Um, Down below, that's an emergency cutoff on the inverter, as well as actually having an emergency kill switch. This was all done by code. And then this one was actually installed what they call line side tap. Um, so this is actually installed directly into the meter as opposed to being installed into the panel inside, which then goes to the meter. So in our part of the country, they allow this. In other parts of the country, they don't allow it. I don't understand exactly what the difference is, but as far as why it's allowed some places and not others, but definitely something to understand as to how that's going to be connected into your power, into your home. Um, so the other part of it is you need to understand where you're going to put all the components. As far as the panels go, southern most facing is the best for the panels. If you have a western or an eastern facing, directly east or west, those are okay, but you definitely want to see if you have something that's facing south and obviously doesn't have any shade. If you can tell, when they originally designed my system, some of the companies were also looking to possibly put some panels on the roof. You can tell that there's shade from a tree in my front yard. So it would not have been a particularly good location. It wasn't horrible, but it's certainly not as good as on the top of the roof, and maximizing that space is what we ended up doing, since those are going to be the best performing panels. As far as the other placement of components is, where are you going to put the inverter? So the part of that's going to be defined on how you connect into the network, whether it's line side or whether it's a breaker panel. If you're doing it via breaker panel, the inverter may be inside right next to the breaker panel. But if you are putting it outside, and this is where this wasn't exactly an ideal location, is you want to try to see if you can keep it out of the sun. Inverters, as they get hot, will be less efficient, as well as solar panels when they get hot will also be less efficient, believe it or not. So you want to keep the inverter out of the sun. Obviously, you can't really do anything about the panels. They need to be in the sun in order to operate. So anyway, keeping in mind where you're going to be placing the components, if you have the ability to place it in a shadier area, maybe you do have a line side, but maybe you have a garage right next to it. You could actually run the inverter into the garage. Some things to consider. So let's get into the results. So on my particular system, there were a couple of different estimates. The last estimate was going to be 7.5 megawatt hours for the year. So I actually did a little bit better than that. I did 7.7 megawatt hours in 2020. So the cost savings at a standard rate in Illinois, or I should say in the ComEd area, which is 12.5 cents per kilowatt hour, I would have saved $968.75. I'm on hourly. I won't go into that. I have another video on hourly. And so it's not as simple just to say this is how much was saved. There's a bunch of complication in hourly pricing and how it works. But in short, there's a demand charge. The demand charge is figured on your highest producing or highest demand that you have during the summer, the 5 highest demand time frames during the summer. So if you have solar, that's obviously on a sunny day is when there's going to be the highest demand, when it's hot out. So by having solar, my demand charge goes down. So I save money that way. Anyway, that's a whole other subject. But if you have standard pricing, this is pretty easy to figure out. Basically just multiplying your total power produced by your system times whatever your standard all-in rate is. So this is not just supply. This is supply and distribution and taxes is about the 12.5 cents. So like I said, $968 was the reduction in power costs. A couple other things to keep in mind. One of the reasons why I'm saving this much money is because I have net metering. So in some parts of the country, when you have solar, you don't have net metering, which is why in some parts of the country, you definitely want to have a battery so you have somewhere for that power to be stored as opposed to giving it to the utility for free. So anyway, so those are basically the results for the year. And, as it makes sense, the biggest performing months were June, July, and August. Not a big surprise there. So definitely happy that I did it, but here's some things to consider. Does it make sense? In other words, how are your roof facing, your roof faces, which direction do they face? Are they in shade? Obviously, if they're in shade, probably not, doesn't make much sense. So just some basic considerations. The design, in other words, which we had to really do, is make the best use of the space you have. We basically had just that one roof face that we could use effectively. So we had to make sure that we made use of as much of the space as possible. Really, all of the available space is used. There's spacing around the outside by code that we couldn't go all the way to the edge of the roof. So we've used as much of the roof as we possibly could. Make sure that you're taking into account all of the costs, both positive and negative. In other words, there's going to be things that are going to be the cash price, for instance, of the system, but then what other incentives are there available? So obviously there's the price, but the other thing to consider with the price is always get a cash price. What a lot of people that try to sell solar systems will do is they are basically going to come to you and say, I can sell you a system where in the beginning it will be net zero, it won't cost you anything. Because basically the savings that you have from the power will equal whatever payments you have to make on the financing. Well, the problem with that is that maybe they could do better than that. So it's always good to get that cash price and to understand what the actual cost of the system is, because once you add the financing, there's a contractor fee that gets added that basically gets hidden unless you get that cash price. So you could maybe find a better solution by either getting a home equity loan or some other way. So know your financing options. There's lots of different options. Also knowing what your tax credits are. And we'll be going over that in a little bit. Other incentives. In Illinois, we have solar renewable energy credits, which I'll go over in a little bit. And then net metering. Does your area have net metering or not? So definitely keeping that in mind as to whether or not you have net metering. That's a very, very important feature, and knowing what type of net metering you have. Anyway, again, I'll get into that a little bit later. Also understanding what the process from contract to install is also very important. What your area requires as far as regulatory approval and those types of things. And then I'll go over some things about installation as well. Again, some lessons learned. Okay, first thing is, does it make sense to install the solar panels? I found this website to be extremely helpful. And in fact, let me pull over. So here's the website. So it's google.com/get/sunroof. So definitely go here. You can click on the savings estimator. I'm going to move over just a tad. I don't dox myself here with my address. But basically this is my house here, and you can see that roof face is where we installed all of our solar panels. So it makes a lot of sense that that's where you would want to install them. Now, like I said, some solar companies were like, hey, you can install something on your garage. Well, you can see there it's lit a little bit, certainly better than the north facing side, but still not great. So this was the obvious choice as to where all of the panels were going to go. You can see in our neighborhood, because we don't have a lot of tall trees, there's a lot of great roofs. I would love to see this person get solar, as they have such a large south-facing roof. It's perfect for it. Anyway, so this is a great place to look. Put your address in, and you'll be able to see. And then they do actually show you, like in this one, they said recommended solar installation size is 5.5 kilowatts. I was actually able to get it up to 6 kilowatts. So it's pretty darn accurate. So anyway, let me get that one out of the way. Okay, so then we talked about design. As I just showed you, the one roof face that we had was the obvious choice to put all the panels. So making the best use of the roof space that you have, it makes a big difference. The other design choice is whether or not you're going to use microinverters or power optimizers. So what's interesting is the same company that installed my system installed my neighbor's system behind me. and they used microinverters. Now, they were about a year and a half apart, and this technology is moving very, very quickly. So just know that this is an option, whether or not you're going to go microinverters or power optimizers, and just ask the question as to why they would do one versus the other. Like I said, in cold temperatures, that was the reason why they went with power optimizers with my system, but there's a good chance that that may have changed at this point. These could possibly go back and forth as as regular inverter technology may improve as well. So just know this is one of the choices that needs to be made. Then supply line or line side versus breaker panel installation. So where the power from the solar panels actually gets put into your home. So again, design choice to know. When I was having them come out, I didn't even give this a second thought until they were installing it. I was like, huh, okay, that's how they're going to do it. So, like I said, it's just good to know ahead of time. In this particular case, I might have asked them to do a breaker panel because if they did do a breaker panel, they would have had to increase the power to the house. And because it's a requirement of solar, I may have been able to take that as part of the cost of the entire system and gotten a tax credit in order to increase the size of my breaker panel as well as increase the amperage service coming to the home. I might have had to increase from 100 to 200 in order to do this. Anyway, it's water under the bridge, just something to keep in mind. If you are doing this, it may be an advantage to, if you were thinking about going from 100 to 200 amp service anyway, might be a way of working it in, possibly. Not tax advice, it's just a thought I had. And also the placement of the equipment. Again, if you can put your inverter in the shade or in an area that isn't in the sun all day, that would be good. So cost. Again, as I talked about a little bit before, cash versus financed price. Get a cash price every time. Make sure you know what the cash price is if you do your own financing. If you're constantly relying on the financing from the solar company, a lot of the actual cost will get lost. If you, I don't know about you, but if I can save $20 a month as opposed to just breaking even, I would rather save $20 a month. So just something to keep in mind. Then the federal tax credit for 2021 is 22%. And then in 2022, it currently goes away. Doesn't mean that there won't be some bill that will extend it at some level for the next year or two. But for right now, the federal tax credit is at 22% for 2021 and isn't being extended yet for 2022 and beyond. State incentives are something else as well. In Illinois, we have what are called, there's a specific program. There's always SRECs, solar renewable energy credits. So these can actually be sold on the open market. So whether your state has a program or not, you can still sell these. What the state incentive allows is for you as a homeowner to get paid all 15 years up front. So that is obviously very valuable because the entire cost of the system is significantly reduced. So basically my system was about $22,000 and it got reduced down to $8,000. So it's a significant reduction between the federal tax credit and the solar renewable energy credits. The other thing to keep in mind about the solar renewable energy credits, at least in Illinois, the way their program runs, is that the solar companies, the ones that are selling you the service, they can do one of two things. They can work with a company that will get the money to you about a year after the system gets installed, or sometime. It probably was quicker. Mine was a little bit over a year because there were a couple of problems, but I got the money in time for when I really needed it. So there's that. Or the solar company may ask you to sign over the rights to the solar renewable energy credits. So there's those two options. Obviously, if you sign it over, um, they have to take the cost and the risk of saying exactly what those XRECs are going to be. So my thought is it's better just to get it direct, even though you have to wait a year in order to get it, because there's no insurance. You're not paying an insurance cost in order to sign it over to them. If you're signing it over to the solar company, they're most likely going to give you a little bit less than what the SRECs actually would have been if you had waited that year, because they're taking on the risk. There's always the possibility that somewhere along the line, somebody's going to make a little bit different calculation as far as what your system will provide. So in my particular case, that did actually happen. The company that was doing the SRECs actually did make me whole on that, as well as the solar company made me whole on. So it basically what I got matched what my proposal was. And then lastly, the net metering versus Powerwall. So in my area, we have full net metering and it's grandfathered, which means we have net metering. And once you get net metering and once you have solar, you will always have it. That's written into the law. So you can rest assured that you're not going to have them, rug pull out that net metering. In some parts of the country, they've done that. So it's something to know up front if what your laws are, so that you know whether or not that's a possibility or not. If later on they decide they're going to rug pull the net metering, you could add a power wall at that point. And the other thing about net metering is understanding if it's the full cost. In Illinois, it's the full cost of your power. So basically, you only get charged for the net power that you use. So let's say I produced 800 kilowatt hours 1 month, and I used 2,000. I'm only going to get billed for that 1,200. And let's even look at it a little bit differently. Let's say that I generated 800, but I only used 600. Well, then I'm going to bank that extra 200 for future months. So again, understanding how your power company is going to bank that net metering as well. If they zero it out in ComEd, they zero it out at the end of April. So as your system is starting to kick up in April, there's a possibility that you may actually, if you've got a net credit at the end of April, you're basically having that zeroed out and you're not getting anything from that. So again, understanding how your net metering works. If you don't have net metering, or let's say you have net metering, but it's only for the supply side, then maybe a Powerwall might make some sense. So keeping that in mind of exactly how you're going to treat your oversupply. So when you are providing extra power, how are you going to handle that extra power? So again, that's one of the things to keep in mind. So as far as the time frame, I've been asked this a lot when I talk about solar as well. How long does it take? Well, it takes a while. This was a pretty short time frame. I've seen others that have had even longer. But in my case, we signed the sales contract at the end of April. May through August was regulatory and permit approvals. So you have two sides of this. You have the city side, just where you need to get a building permit, which mine went very, very quickly. So that was good. And I live in a town that's very supportive of solar. They don't, there's some certifications that they have, but they are extremely supportive of solar. So there's not a lot of red tape to go through. So that part is good. But there's also the regulatory side of things because you're hooking up into the grid. So ComEd has specific requirements that each system has to meet. And so they have to check the plans. They have to make sure that it meets all the guidelines. And so there's a lot of red tape on that side of thing. that really tends to take the most time. So, but in my case, 4 months basically was all it took. Actually, it was even less than 4 months. So it really didn't take that long. And the timing of it actually just kind of matched up with some of the meetings. So it worked out pretty well as far as to shorten my cycle because of the timing of it. So then in August, right in the middle of August was when I had it installed. So then it started generating 1 week after install. So basically, ComEd has to do a final inspection, and then they will give you the permission to turn the system on. So basically, for a week, I'm sitting here with a beautiful new solar system on my house that I can't turn on. So anyway, but again, it only took 1 week. It wasn't that long, but it was the longest week of my life, I think. Anyway, then once you have it turned on, you're generating electricity. But until the start of your next bill, at least with ComEd, until the start of your next bill, your net metering hasn't started yet. So it was nice actually that I started in the summer so that I had the air conditioning on a lot. It was very hot. So I didn't basically give up too much as far as overproduction back to the grid for free. But again, it's only for summer between, whatever your time frame is from when you turn it on to the beginning of the next bill. So anyway, so again, about 4 or 5 months is about what it took to actually get it installed. So now we get into some things that are a little bit more painful, shall we say. Anyway, so some lessons learned. So one of the things is pay attention during installation. Really know what is going to occur and why. And I guess I'd say I was probably a little naive. I was watching what they were doing, but I thought they knew what they were doing, and I wasn't really watching for the mistakes. So, a couple of things came up. Basically, there was one mounting bolt that missed a stud, so they're actually having to come out and fix that a year and a half later. So that's supposed to be happening in the next week or two. On top of that, they misinstalled. They basically made a mistake when they were installing one of the flashings for a conduit mount, and basically we ended up getting ice damming along that shingle that they cut into that they weren't supposed to cut into for this. So nothing dramatic. We haven't had ice damming in our house for about 30 years we've been here. So it was very surprising to finally get some. So we're like, what's going on here? To only find out that it's because they incorrectly installed a flashing. So anyway, understanding what's being mounted where and why. Like I said, it's not impossible to get things fixed afterwards, but it's a lot easier if they do it right the first time. And then ask questions, make suggestions. On ours, because they took the conduit to basically you have the panels and the conduit has to run out of the panel somewhere and then go down to the inverter. What they did with ours is they ran the conduit down the roof line to the bottom of the panels and then went sideways from there. The problem is that because of the way that they did that, all the snow falling off was basically hitting that conduit and stopping there as opposed to just sliding all the way off. So they're going to fix that. They're going to make sure the conduit goes out the side so the snow has a much easier fall. So anyway, just some small details that were missed during installation. Again, it'll get fixed, and it's not a big deal. Like I said, the ice damming that I'm talking about was very, very minor. And as soon as they fix the conduit as well as the mount point for the conduit, it'll be fine. So hopefully you found that helpful. I plan on having a live stream sometime probably this weekend. Saturday or Sunday, I'll have one. So if you have any questions, save up your questions for there. If you do have questions, please put them in the comments below. That way I can be prepared to answer some of these questions on the live stream. The provider of the system that I had was Sun Badger. I'm very happy with the choice I made. They've also made some additional improvements. They now have their own install staff. I wish they had their own install staff when I had mine installed, but they do now. They have, anytime there's ever been an issue, they have made it right. In this particular case, they're, with some of the issues I just mentioned, they are making those right. I cannot recommend them enough. I mean, I've been really, really happy with them. So down below, I do have a referral link. So if you do want to get a quote, you live in Florida, Illinois, Minnesota, or Wisconsin, in the states that they operate, I would say that they would be a good choice to get one of your quotes from. And I always suggest get multiple quotes. Don't just get one. So again, thank you very much. And like I said, if you have any questions, I plan on having a live stream this coming weekend. Thanks. Have a good night.